All right. It should be loading up here soon. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? If you want to communicate with me, just look at the chat box to the right of the window and you can type in something if you want to say hi. I know there's going to be some familiar faces in here. There's a slight delay between me talking and you guys hearing my response, so you might hear some pauses. Can everyone hear me okay? Hi, Kim. How are you? Hi, Jackie. Okay, good, good. I just wanted to make sure we're using a new mic, so I wanted to make sure it's working just fine. All right, so it looks like most of you are here, so we'll go ahead and get started. How did the first week go for everyone? Hi, Kelly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, compared to the charcoal drawing class, we went through the drawing phase in pretty much one video. So I know there's probably a lot of questions everyone has, and the grid is a little different than what we did for the drawing. But I like to use the grid for painting because it helps me with composition, and also the grid doesn't really get transferred, as you'll see in the new videos today. So since you're here, Kelly, I'm going to go ahead and get started with yours. And did you have any specific questions? Everyone did really good on their drawings. Everyone captured likeness, and yeah, everything looks really good. All right, so Kelly, if you have any questions, just type them in. Hi, Diane, welcome. Hi, Susan, good to see you. Okay, so Kelly, if you have any questions, just type them in and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box. But overall, your placement is really good. You did capture a very strong likeness. I did notice just a few things. And so if you look here on the right side, the hair, I think it got just a little bit big. So I would bring that in, especially because when we go into the painting, as you'll see in the new videos today, I kind of break beyond that line with, some curls when I'm painting. So you want to draw your line a little bit further back than, where you see the edge of her curls here. They're kind of there. And so I would bring your line maybe back to around there or even less. And then you can kind of pull with your paint any little curls out from that line. And let me take a look here. The mouth is just a little bit off. There's something in the jawline too, and I noticed this in my drawing too for the demonstration. She has this kind of angle change here where it's an underplane. You can see her jaw. If we zoom in here, you can see there is a straight line that comes down, but then the shadow shape kind of comes up like that. So what I would suggest is just addressing that little area. And then with the mouth, I feel like your center line for the lips is maybe a little bit off from the center of where you have the features here. So let me compare really quick to the drawing here. So we'll just kind of flash back between the two. It's very subtle. What I'm noticing is it's mostly this corner here. So I think what you need to do is actually just shorten this and indicate maybe the corner of her mouth around there. And then just remember that her eyes and everything is on this slight tilt. So you'll want to make sure that where you place the corners of the mouth exists on that same parallel tilt. Okay? Even though it might go up in the middle, just make sure that you have that tilt relationship. So your line goes down there, you might need to move that up. Okay, so just making sure there is that relationship between those 2 points. And you might just drop some vertical lines too to see where the corners of her mouth line up. I remember them lining up somewhat with the inside of the iris, and it looks like yours here is lined up just fine, but maybe just double check where you have that deep corner. She does have a little bit of a shadow shape on the other side of that, but I think yours still pushes over too far to the right. So I would just bring that over to the left a little bit shorter, maybe by about that much. So let me take another look at it. But overall, it's really great. So yeah, I think maybe just slightly tall here too. So maybe just bring that down. Again, you can bring the little wisps of her curls up from that main line, but for our transfer, just bring it in just a little bit, and then in the paint you can kind of break past that line. You'll see what I mean when you watch today's demonstration, the new videos. And let me see, I'll just do one last check. Oops. Yeah, I would just look at maybe this corner here where you have this placed. I feel like her lash line is just a little bit lower, even though she does still have this upward tilt between the inner corner and the outer corner. You might need to lower that just a little bit and then bring that one down. It's a very small amount, but it'll help the eyes feel a little bit more cohesive across the form. Otherwise, that you did a great job. So I think you can make those small changes and you'll be ready for the transfer. You might end up just rechecking your measurement in here. I know in my portrait, I think I made her a little long, so I'll probably make a little bit of an adjustment there when I go into the second layer of my painting. But it's kind of deceptive, that spacing there, because we have this form under here. Let me pick a brighter color. So we have this underplane here, but then we have the shadow shape, and the ball of the chin is actually up here, so we're seeing some of that underside of the neck. And so it's kind of deceptive in length, and it might throw you off. So just take another look at that in relationship to the grid, because everything else seems to be placed pretty well within that grid shape. The placement of the nose, yeah, let me take a look at that real quick. It's very close. I really think it's more the mouth. And maybe just slightly how far out you, or how far down, sorry, you brought this line. On her, it kind of slopes off a little bit sooner. It's very, very minor. You might just, I think I stopped my transfer line around here because I saw a shadow shape end there and then a new shadow shape kind of pick up here. And so I left that blank so that I didn't have a hard outline there with my transfer. But I think the nose placement seems pretty good. Yeah, maybe your left nostril could come up just a little bit. But it's, again, it's very, very small amount. So you did a really great job. And I'll send you these edits here after the critique is over. Is there anything else, Kelly? You're very welcome. Yeah, a very nice job. Everyone did a great job. I'm really excited to see your paintings develop. Okay, so Kate, are you with us, Kate? You can just type in the little chat box on the right of the video. Yeah, you did really nice job. You captured a good likeness. There's a few things I think in the mouth area and maybe on the ear that could use a bit of work. So let's take a look at that. And I also think the same kind of thing with the hair. Again, because her hair is curly, you can see from this angle that there's kind of this, let me use a white line. You can kind of see that there's this main mass of hair where the dark is, and then there's these little wisps that kind of come out. This is where I would draw my line for the transfer, and then when I'm painting, as you'll see in the demo later, I'll bring out some of these little, edges in the painting stage. So for the transfer, just try to look at the main mass of the hair and simplify that shape. So that way when you're painting, and if you try to bring out any line, any wisps of hair from this shape, the hair shape's going to get too large. So what I would recommend is bringing this down to about, maybe a little taller than that. Maybe about there. And then, yeah, bring this one in. And I think it's a little wide right here. Again, same principle, bringing those wisps in, but look at where the hair comes in and intersects with the ear. So what I would do is bring that in a little bit. And she has a little more space in the forehead here. So I would bring the hair shape. Your simplification of the hair shape is great, but I would just bring those lines up a little higher just to allow a little more space. And then this could be pretty close to where the cast shadow is. It's maybe not as strong as that shape. So I would just bring the hair up a little bit and then readjust where your cast shadows are. The shape in here is pretty close. I think you could leave it there just fine. And you might consider just defining maybe that curl there because it's pretty clear. And then with the ear, I would just define the shape. I think maybe her ear is a little taller. Just a little bit at the very top. And then I always like to just indicate this overlap that I see where the cheekbone and the ear kind of meet. You don't have to draw it real dark, but I find it helpful. And then when you're transferring the ear, I know there's a lot of information going on, but I try to simplify it. So I would just look at the shadow shapes and maybe one line for the opening of the ear canal. So just kind of simplify that shape a little bit. So let's look at a slight difference here. Okay, so it does feel like some of the features sunk a little low, and part of that was, I think, the hairline being pushed down. It kind of pushed some of the other features down. I think you have enough spacing towards the bottom, but I feel like the nose got a little long. So if you look at the spacing between the mouth and the nose, so you can see where you have yours placed. That's the red line there, and where hers are sitting. So I think if you bring the mouth up and the nose up just a little bit, and let's look at the eyes. I'm going to draw kind of that tilt from the tear duct to the outer corner. Yeah, so actually your left eye seems pretty good, pretty close, but the right eye here is a little bit low. So I would bring that up a little bit. So let me kind of mark where the corners are. Okay, so by about that much. And it looks like it can move over to the left a little bit. That's going to help lock everything else into place. And with her lips, I think part of the spacing issue here too is that you gave her a little bit of a fuller upper lip. And so what I would do is just bring that down a little bit more. And then notice that there's an angle change here to here. So just make sure you have some of that foreshortening on the far side of the mouth. It's not as straight as you had placed it. Once you get those locked into place, you should be ready for your transfer. So what I would always recommend, and this kind of goes for everyone, is to, when you're ready to transfer, you might go over your lines a little bit darker. You might go over them with either like a thin micro pen or a pen or a dark pencil, just so that when you coat the back of your transfer paper, you don't lose a sense of your drawing. Mine was just barely visible in some areas, and I noticed later on when I was painting, the transfer line had gotten off for the mouth. And so that can happen. You can kind of lose some of that translation if your lines aren't very clear. So once you've finished your drawing, I recommend going over your drawing a little bit darker so that you can see the lines, and then coating the back. Because, like I said, these small things can get put off a little bit, and it'll just help make sure when you do the transfer it's nice and smooth. All right, so that is all of my suggestions for this one. Really nice job with everything. And there's a little bit of actually a little distinction down here. It's not a big deal, but her blouse comes down just a little bit more. Just remember that this here is the center line for the body. So just keep that in mind, and that will kind of help you make sure the figure feels rotated on that 3/4 angle. All right, Jackie, I saw you in here. All right, so did you have any questions, Jackie, in particular for this? Your drawing is very, very close. There really weren't too many things that I saw. Maybe a little bit of fullness in the lip, especially the lower lip. So let's take a quick look Yeah, it's very small. You're very spot on. I think her eyes, it probably helps that you also drew her um, in the last class because you kind of got familiar with her features. So I imagine this one went maybe a little more smooth. That's fine if you have to step away. You can always scrub back and watch the section that you missed. Okay, so yeah, my suggestion would be just, it's actually not, the left eye feels pretty good. I think this one feels like it could open up a little bit more, especially if you look at the angles to her eye here. There's that kind of steep angle there, and then there's that steep angle there. And I think you have maybe the top one pretty close, but I feel like the bottom one maybe needs to open up a little bit more. That way you can make sure the iris is the same size as the one on the left. And then with regards to the mouth, I actually think there's a little bit, maybe, here, let me flash back to, yeah, so, man, it's really close, but I think her lip kind of comes up a little bit more. And let's see how that looks. Yeah, it's very small amount. But I think if you kind of raise that right corner and then you brought this up, her shadow shape can probably stay in the same spot. It's just that inner rim there. I think you could bring that up a little higher, and that will help capture her shape a little bit better. Let's see. I can't tell if it's just the paper, the photo being so light, but you might make sure you make her eyebrow long enough past this grid line. And let's see, I'm not seeing very much else. Everything else seems really good, so I think you're ready for the transfer beyond those 2 marks. Do you have any questions? Shoulders. I noticed her shoulders maybe a little more square. One thing that always helps is to indicate where you see the clavicles. This shape here maybe could be raised up just a small amount because this shoulder feels like it's dropped quite a bit lower than the right. Let me take a look at the yeah, I think her shoulder sits up here in this corner. Actually, no, your left shoulder seems good. Maybe it's the right shoulder being square. Let me check before I... Yeah, I think maybe check the width of the arm. And the squareness in the shoulder. I'm just going to draw those lines there to see where they are on your drawing. It's very minor though. I don't... Yeah, okay, so it looks like the left side is is pretty good as far as placement goes. The right side is very, very close. I think maybe just instead of rounding out the right shoulder, make it a little bit more square so we feel that bony structure underneath. The width of your arm seems good. I really think it's just maybe the roundness and not having anything indicated in the clavicle area. And I think maybe this line has more of an angle, but that's being pretty picky. I mean, they look fine. I think you're really ready to transfer. The width and everything looked great. So if it still bothers you, like I said, sometimes indicating even the shadow shape on the shoulder can help change the kind of the feeling of that shape. You know, it can make it feel more squared off. And again, indicating where the pit of the neck is. And I always like to indicate the overlap of the neck that you see in here. It might be good to just indicate it with, maybe don't draw the whole shape in because then you'd have a dark line there, but you might just give yourself a slight indication of that overlap. I can't quite tell if you have that in the drawing, but just a small line like that will remind you when you're in the form stage. Yeah, you know, the clavicles, they're not quite a shadow shape, so the problem with transferring the lines is that you might have a really dark line that you're going to have to try and conceal. So kind of watch the demonstration video so you kind of understand the process. They will eventually be covered with more paint, so the line won't show through, but just kind of watch the demo and you can decide to put them in, or kind of, I would maybe just indicate with a short line, just the placement maybe of this top plane here. Just a short, even a dotted line or a broken line, just so that you can, you know, keep in mind where the placement is, but it shouldn't distract too much and it should be pretty easy to hide and cover up. When we're transferring for painting, we have to think a little bit differently about, you know, our shapes. You might, like I mentioned with some of the other portraits, because she has wavy hair, I would maybe bring the hairline in just a little bit and, you know, give yourself a little more room, because when we paint, we want our paint to go just past that line, that transfer line, because you're going to need to create a soft edge for the hair. And so you're going to want just a little bit of space, not by very much. Where the hair is more broken up, like down in here, sure, you might bring your line back quite a bit because you can always push out with your paint. But in the top of the head, you know, I would keep it pretty close to where you have it. Just give yourself a little bit of space to paint past that line without the head getting too big. Does that make sense? If any questions come up as you're working and you're not sure which lines to transfer and which ones to kind of leave out, just send me a quick email and I'll get back to you. You're very welcome. Yeah, beautiful drawing. I can't wait to see it in paint. All right, Susan, you are up. Did I see you in here earlier? Yes, I did. Hi, Susan. So nice to see familiar faces in here again. Okay, so yeah, really nice drawing. And I think you said, I don't see a grid on here, so did you draw the grid on a different sheet of paper? Like kind of like I did, and then the final drawing didn't have the grid? And the grid is not for everyone. It's just a process, you know, I sometimes employ. Okay, yeah. So when I do a grid, it's usually a very large grid like the one you see here on the photo. I don't tend to get real tight with my grids. I find them really distracting. And I try to use them more for general placement. No, that's okay, no problem. It's not a big deal. I was able to line up the face and not worry about the grit, so it's no big deal. Don't worry about that. So yeah, you have a really great likeness. The only thing I'm sensing is maybe a little bit of heaviness in the jaw here. Here, let me, in the left side. It's in here, and I think it's because if you look closely, she has an angle change right in this area. It's very subtle, but from this angle you can kind of see it. So what I would do is look for that, and it might give her a little less of a heavy jaw on the lower left, because I feel like you captured her jawline pretty well on the right side. There might be a little bit of width, but I think part of that is just because I can't quite tell where you're placing the cheekbone. I would just give yourself a slight overlap there. You don't need to really outline or connect these areas, but just a slight overlap where you see this tone here for her cheekbone. She has very, very strong kind of structured cheekbones. So just a little indication for when you're painting so that you can keep in mind where the light is going to hit the ear, and then you might have more mid-tone coming over to that edge. Yeah, and the negative shapes can really, really help you see that. It's just a very slight change, like you said. I showed you here. It's by maybe that much. It's really not really exaggerated. Let me bring up the image here. Yeah, you can see it's very, very close. Yeah, I think maybe the jawline, her face is actually quite narrow, even though the width of her cheekbones makes it feel like her face is wider. It's something I try to pay attention to in my drawing as well. It's hard to tell if her face is kind of long and narrow or wide. So I would kind of look at your placement there. It's really close. Your line is back here. I think if you just brought that line over by a small amount and then just leave this lower half where it is and just kind of connect it here. So your line kind of goes back a little bit. I think that will help give you a little more width on the neck that we can see, and also it'll just slender her jaw ever so slightly. That coupled with the change here on the left, and it'll lock in her likeness. Let me take another look. Something in the nose, but I can't tell. I think it might be just the placement of this shadow shape, which gives her nose a slightly more upturned kind of appearance. I'm just going to kind of mark the parameters that I see. Yeah, it looks like your placement of the nose is really close. So I think you can leave it where it is, but I would indicate this the little form shadow on the ball of the nose, especially on the left side, because that's going to give us a better sense of the underplane. Yeah, let me look at her eyes. She kind of has that. She has very small eyes, and her lid is kind of hooded, so it's very easy to make her eyes too small, and it's also easy to make them too big. I've painted her a couple of times, and it's something I'm always, kind of going back and forth on. And then I know in my portrait that I'm doing for the demo, it also has that slight crossed-eyed look. So let me just take a quick look at that. Yeah, you know, I think you could actually maybe open up the eye. It could be that her irises got too small. So let me just kind of do a quick markup here. So here's kind of, and she's wearing eyeliner too, so that kind of is a little deceptive at the top. And then her lash line is here. So let's just take a quick look at that. And I'll do that for this eye too, just to see. I think it's mostly the opening and the size of the iris. So I'm just going to place those marks there, and let's just see how it compares. You're very close. Yeah. I think what I would do is make the iris, leave the left side where it is, but maybe open up the right side and center the pupil a little bit more. And then where you see this line, that's her lash line. So I tried to center that with her, for example, her eyeliner goes above that line. So that's kind of where the lid should be. And I think you having this line down here might just be confusing. Is that supposed to be the cast shadow from her eyelashes? It looks just a little low. And it could be that you also lowered the corner. You have it down here. So I would just lift that corner a little bit. You can leave the lid where it is. And then this will kind of come up like that, and you'll have the likeness in her eye. It looks like the left eye is just right, so you don't need to make any corrections there. I think it's just that right eye. Lift it a little bit. You might try taking the photograph and lightening it so you can see a little bit more of what's going on in the eye, because I know it is a little confusing because there are, you know, there is the outline of her eyeliner, and then there is a cast shadow here that kind of comes in below that. I don't tend to draw the cast shadow unless it's really, really dominant, like if she had a big cast shadow kind of underneath her eye, then I might sketch it in. But for the purpose of the transfer for your painting, mostly focus on the lash line and maybe a little bit of the eyeliner, and that's it. And you don't really see much of the inner, the waterline on the upper lid, so you don't need to worry about trying to fit that in. What size are you drawing? What size is your painting? Because that dictates kind of how much detail you can really squeeze in realistically to a portrait. 11 by 14. Okay, so that's the same size I'm working. So yeah, I wouldn't put much more detail than what you see here in the red. And that should help with the cross-eyed feel. Just remember that where you have this overlap, her lash line sits on the bottom, sits a little bit below that. You don't need to necessarily draw it in, only if you feel like it will help. So let's see, yeah, I think that pretty much was it. Let me take one more look. Yeah, your line for the hair is perfect. You'll be pulling, you know, some of these little wisps out. But where you have the main mass of the hair seems good. Even your line for the mouth seems good, even though you haven't indicated some of that tone that kind of comes this way. I think where you have the corner of the mouth placed is pretty good. Maybe it's a little higher, but it's so minor that I'm not going to worry about that. It feels like it's in line with the features, so I wouldn't stress over that. If you wanted to just give her a little bit more of that smile or smirk that she has, you know, you might just do a quick little upturn at that very outside corner. Let me look at that left side of the mouth. So the trick with this photo is that it's kind of hard to see where the actual opening of the mouth is because there's this cast shadow shape around it. I have a little bit of that in my drawing too, so what I tend to do is try to find somewhere around where I can see, and then you have that shadow shape, and then you have a little cast shadow that goes below that. So what I would indicate is that outside shape, and you could indicate a little bit of that inner corner, but that outside shape is pretty important, and it might be a little shorter and lower than what you have. But again, it's very, very minor. I think you captured her likeness really nice, so I wouldn't worry about too much else. Do you have any questions? Did you send me a picture of your imprimatura? If it's a little dark, it's not that big of a deal. It kind of depends. So when I'm trying to determine how dark my imprimatura is going to be, I have to look at the photo reference. And what I do is I look at the average shadow value, okay, for the masses. And then I also look at what the reflected light value is. And she doesn't have very much reflected light in this image, not nearly as much as I have in mine. Oh, okay. So send me a picture if you're not sure. But if it's still wet, you could try letting it kind of sit there for an hour or so, and then take a clean, dry brush that's soft and go over it. You could also try doing that with a rag. But generally, you're aiming for that reflected light value, which is kind of like right there. You might have a little bit of reflected light in here, but because your shadows on her face are so dark, I don't think you need to worry if you have a dark imprimatura. So long as it's not pitch black or like the darkest your paint can go, you'll be fine. Because the only area you'll really want to go darker is here in the pupils, and you'll want to be able to make the eyebrow a little bit darker than this shadow mass, for example. So aim for something in this value range and you'll be okay. It's always easy to go darker too, so if you want to err on the safe side, go slightly lighter than you think you need, because we can always glaze darker. Oh, it's dry and you put the isolation layer? Okay, send me a picture. I noticed the photo I had sent out to looked a little bit light for my painting. You'll see in the video how dark it really feels. So maybe before you do anything with your panel, kind of watch the demo and kind of gauge it on that. You don't want it really, really opaque or really, really pale as far as adding a lot of white to the imprimatura. You're kind of aiming, like I said, for a shadow. The white is just to add a slight amount of opacity to it and cool it off just a little bit, so that way when we start going into the grisaille, it doesn't feel so jarring against the transparent kind of burnt umber. So it's just to help them integrate a little bit. So if you have questions on the imprimatura, just send me an email with a picture, and I'll let you know if I think it's too dark or if you're probably fine for transferring. The only problem you might have actually with the transfer, if your imprimatura is really, really dark, when you transfer your lines, it might be hard to see them. So what you could try doing is, do you have any other oil paints like ultramarine blue or anything like that? So the umber kind of can only go a certain level of darkness. So if your imprimatura is really dark, it's kind of hard to see your transfer lines. You'll see in my demo, though, that the transfer lines sometimes sink in and will look lighter. even within a few minutes of the transfer. So if you're kind of concerned about that, add a little bit of ultramarine blue to your burnt umber so it looks a little more like a black. It'll still dry pretty quick, and use that to tone the back of your paper for the transfer. And it'll help you see your lines a little bit more clearly if your imprimatura is really dark. But when I did my transfer, and you'll see this in the video today, the next day after letting my lines dry, the drawing had sunk in and it was barely visible. And so I show everyone what to do if that happens. So you'll see that in the video. All right, good job, and I look forward to seeing your painting next week. Okay, Angela, are you with us? You can type in the little chat box to the right of the video. Let me know if you're here. All right, so yeah, you have a really strong drawing. I didn't see that much to change, so let's kind of take a quick look here. There is something going on with the size of the right eye compared to the left eye. So I would take a look at that. My feeling is that the right eye is a little large and that the left eye is pretty close to being the right size. I would also make sure I indicate the lower lid volume and make sure you look at that, the way the lower lid kind of rotates around the eye and kind of rounds out this far side of the eye. Her cheekbone might be a little bit too large. You can see in the photo here on the right, it's a little bit more straight between here and here, and you have a big kind of rounded shape there. So I think I would check your width. It could be also that this needs to come in by about that much. That way it kind of smooths out the 3/4 profile of her face. With the right eye, notice how this line, the grid line, touches, but it goes slightly past, if you look closely, into, it almost touches the inner pupil, okay? And you have the iris lined up with it. So you have yours here. So I think what you need to do is bring this just a little bit past to about there. And then I would double check the tilt placement here. And you might find that once you move that over, that you can shrink the eye a little bit more on the right side. This could have gotten large because you had placed the iris slightly too far to the right. Okay, so then you'll have to reposition your pupil. Hi Gilberto, how are you? Welcome. Yeah, everyone's welcome to attend these. Hi Dominique. Yeah, if you guys have questions, we'll do a little Q&A at the very end. You were having issues with the imprimatura. I think you had wrote me a question this morning and I answered it about transferring. Yeah, we'll do a little Q&A at the end of this session once I get through with everyone's critique. But yeah, just stay tuned because you never know. I tend to talk about a few issues that maybe you're having as well, so it's always good to kind of just tune in and watch. Okay, so let me take a quick look here. So one thing I'm noticing, I think when I was lining this up, I was having trouble lining up the grid. Part of it is the position of the eyes. It looks like the nose is in a good position, but the mouth needs to come up a little bit, and the eyes a little bit as well. So if I just draw let me do this in a different color. So if I draw where the tops of the eyes are, and the bottom, corner of the mouth, and the center of the mouth, and then the nose. I just want to look at the overall placement. And there's the shadow shape and the chin. So let me just remove that. Okay. So yeah, you can see the mouth. This is supposed to be the center opening of the mouth. It's a little bit too low in your drawing, but the nose is in a correct position. So what's happening is this spacing here to the bottom of the nose is too large. So start by moving the mouth up a little bit. What that'll mean is that your upper lip is going to come up like that, and then the bottom lip is going to come up as well. And then with your eyes, they're not that far off. It's almost like where you have your crease for the eyelid is where the lash line needs to be. So I would just bring everything up just a little bit with the eyes and the mouth, but leave the nose and the chin where it's at. So it looks like your shadow shape for the chin is spot on, and that is pretty much it. Everything else looks pretty close. Maybe check the width of the arm here on the left. It feels a little rounded. Maybe straighten that out a little bit to give her a little more narrow shoulder. Your placement of the hair seems great because you still have room where you can bring, some of the little wisps of curls out like you'll see in the demo video. And the neck looks good. So yeah, just concentrate on the eyes and the mouth, and everything else should lock into place and you'll be ready to transfer. If you have any questions, I'm not sure if you're in here, but if you have any questions, just shoot me an email after, and you'll get a photo. Everybody's critique today, I'm going to send you a photo of my edits so you can use that to kind of help you correct your drawing. And also, about an hour after our critique ends, it will be posted to my YouTube channel, so you can always go back and rewatch this critique and remind yourself of some of the things I mentioned. All right, really nice job, and yeah, I look forward to seeing your painting develop. All right, Beth, you are up. Are you with us, Beth? I know some of you said you weren't going to be able to attend the first one. All right, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions, you can just type it into the chat box or send me an email if you're not here. Okay, so I think what I'm seeing the most is that the right eye feels a little bit high and maybe to the right. It has to do something with the tilt. So what I would suggest is maybe moving that down just a little bit. part of that too is the length of the nose. So let me pull up the other reference. Okay, and I noticed that when I was trying to line up the grid that I had to actually turn the reference because your tilt of the head was a little exaggerated. And that's okay. You don't really need to change that too much so long as we get the features lined up correctly in your drawing, then it's okay if the head tilt's a little exaggerated. I wouldn't worry about that too much. So what I did was instead of lining up the grid, I lined up the features. Okay, so one thing I was noticing, here's the inner corner of the eye, outer corner of the eye, opening here, and then of course the iris. And I'm going to go ahead and mark just position of this eye as well. So you can see that this eye needs to come down and to the left just a little bit. And then on the left side, it needs to come up. And that's going to kind of change your tilt from feeling so skewed this way, and it's going to feel a little bit more appropriate this way. And it'll actually feel a little more in line with what you have in the features. And then the main thing I noticed was that the height of the nose, especially the distance between here and here, felt a little bit long. So here's where you have the bottom of the nose, and this is where the bottom of the nose needs to be. And so what that's going to do is that's going to shorten the ball of the nose to about there. And it's going to give you a little more room to bring the mouth up because this is feeling a little bit small for her. So if we look at just position of the mouth, here is where it needs to be. Okay, so it's really more about getting the height of the features. Your eyes are really, really close, so I think if you just nudge that one down and then move these up, then everything else should lock into place, because I felt like the rest of your relationships in the portrait were pretty close. The shoulder on the right could be a little higher. But as far as position of the head and your width of the head and proportions, that seemed pretty good. So it's only because it seems like things got off in your grid. I would kind of bring that up, yeah, about there. And let's make sure the arm is wide enough. No, it needs to, the arm needs to come out just a little wider. Move over, and that'll be kind of your new sleeve, so you might need to extend that over a little bit. Now it looks like that might go off your canvas a little bit, but that's okay. What I would do is place just an indicator of where that is, and then when you position your transfer paper onto your canvas, just nudge it to the left so that you can fit the whole arm on there. That way it doesn't cut off in an awkward spot. Okay, we don't really want to cut off at any of the joints, so you can just nudge her over on your canvas when you transfer by about that much, and you should have enough room to fit that arm in there. That's one of the reasons I had us draw on paper as opposed to directly on the panel. I know some of you had questions about that. And yes, it does add another step to the drawing and to the process, but you will always have your drawing to come back to. So it's not going to be, if you lose a sense of something in the features, you will always have your original drawing with you. And also, when we have to make a lot of eraser marks and stuff, that can kind of affect your ground. And it depends on the surface you're working on, but sometimes it can wear down the painting ground and it can cause some funny issues. So I like to draw on the paper, and then I always end up with a nice clean transfer. And then the additional benefit to that is you can always change your composition and kind of nudge your figure over if you feel like you drew them in kind of an odd placement. So it kind of gives you an additional opportunity to double check your composition. Okay, so composition is really important in portraits. You never want the head, dead center in the portrait. You never would want to draw a head right here and then the shoulders. I've broken that rule a couple of times with portraits, but I tend to always favor a little bit off to the right or left of center. It's always good to have them slightly above, for head and shoulder anyway, slightly above the midline and slightly off center, whether it's one side or the other. It just kind of depends. If I was doing a profile and they were facing to the left, I wouldn't want to push them too far to the edge. I would probably favor the right side if they're facing to the left. Does that make sense, guys? It's just kind of thinking about, the way the picture is going to read. Now, placing someone low on the canvas creates tension, and that can be something you want in a painting. Sometimes you might, or like if you take a really high angle looking down on someone, you might have them lower in the composition. And I've done that in certain paintings where I wanted to create, like in a recent painting, I had a giant storm behind the figure, and I wanted that storm to feel just overbearing and massive and kind of compressing her down into the panel, into the bottom of the composition, feel a little bit like overwhelming and oppressive. And so you can use those things in composition to your advantage. But just as a general rule, don't place them smack center. Okay, so nobody did that, but that was partly because I had placed these grids where I did. Okay, so those were my only suggestions. Really nice job. If you have any follow-up questions, just send me an email. I look forward to seeing your painting. All right, Kim? Are you here, Kim? Hi, Lori. Welcome. All right, Kim, I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right. Yeah, you have a really nice likeness. I didn't really see too much in terms of suggestions for changes. The only thing I would caution would be the hairline, again, for the sake of the transfer, because she has, kind of curls. I would bring your line in just a small amount. It seems okay. Oops. Didn't mean to create a straight line. It seems okay here on the right side, but I would say just with the back of the head, she feels a little wide. So it'll give you an opportunity to break that line a little bit. You'll see in the demonstration today that you might want to bring your line in just a small amount, because we'll be bringing our paint back past that line just a little bit for the little wisps of the hair and such. So you might bring that in, and it did feel a little bit wide here. You'll notice we can see a little bit of a gap in this little space here, and that's the side of her head where it's kind of shorter. So you might want to make sure you have that little gap in your drawing. And let's see. So let me just flash this picture up. Yeah, it's looking really good. Features seem in place. The only thing I would say is when you're getting ready to transfer, I would indicate maybe the bridge of the nose here. Let me look at the reference. And a little bit here when you transfer, or do maybe a broken line there, mostly because it's in the light shape and we don't want that hard outline to show through our paint. So just make sure you can give yourself a couple of the marks for placement, but just don't transfer a very solid outline because it'll be kind of hard to hide in the painting. You can do that along the shadow edge here because it's going to be concealed within the shadow mask. And you'll see why after you watch the videos, because we're doing glazing and scumbling for this first layer to kind of block out our painting in the new lessons, which are up and available, by the way. And so yeah, sometimes we just, when I'm painting, I think a little bit differently about what is kind of necessary for the transfer and what's not. Same thing goes for the lips. For example, here on the left side we have a lost edge. I would not transfer a line there. I would just kind of leave it blank. What I would transfer is the little dark shape here and maybe a little indication of where the lights or the lip comes out. On the upper lip, I usually indicate where I see it kind of darkest, or I might just give myself a couple of points to go on for the transfer instead of going with a very full kind of outline. With regards to her lips, I think this is kind of cutting in a little bit too much. I would just make it a little more subtle of an angle right in there. It'll give her a little more fullness through here. And then she does have a slight more full shape to her lip, and I think this line here, even though we see it tonally, I would leave it out of your transfer and just transfer the little shadow shape here and maybe a little indication of where those lines start, but don't transfer that whole line. And again, like, you wouldn't need to transfer the highlight. Let's see. With the left side of the hair, I do feel like it got a little big for this curl. I would just bring it again in a little bit, enough to where you could bring out this curl on the right that kind of overlaps over here just with paint, and it'll feel a little bit more painterly and loose, and it won't feel like this static drawing that's been transferred. I'll take one last glance, but everything else in terms of position looked pretty close. With the arm, it feels just a little rounded in there, so maybe thin that out. But that's it. So yeah, really nice job, and if you have any questions, just send me an email. All right. Catherine, or is it Catherine? Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Please let me know if I do, and I'll try to remember to say it right next time. Are you with us, Catherine? For those of you who are kind of showing up a little bit later or popping in, there is a chat box to the right of the video. You can just type in hello, or if you're here. After I get through with these final critiques, we'll do a brief Q&A session if we have some time. I'll kind of stop for a 5-minute break, and then I'll be continuing with Group B. And not everyone submitted for Group B, so I'm going to be... Oh, hi, Kate. Okay, so if you're watching this on mobile, apparently you don't have a chat box. So yeah, try to watch this on desktop if you can, or if you're only able to watch on mobile. I'm surprised there isn't a chat box, but maybe that has to do with the app. So you can always send me your questions before we do the live review, and I'll try to cover those. Kate, did you catch your critique earlier? I'm pretty sure I covered yours already. Yeah, you were second. Did you watch yours? Okay, good. Did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? Okay, good, good. Well, if there's any follow-up questions, even as you guys are working, you can reach out to me by email. Okay, great, great. Okay, Catherine, so let's take a look at your drawing. You have a really nice start here. I don't see, again, everyone did so well. I'm having a hard time finding things to suggest. There's a slight difference in her eye, and it's mostly in the expression of the right eye and maybe a little bit in the mouth. So let's take a look at that. I feel like this part here comes up a little bit too high, and part of that is probably because of her eyeliner. So when I'm drawing eyes, I always try to look at where I see the angle change the most, and she's looking over at us, but there's kind of a peak here on the left side, and her lashes kind of come down, and she does have that eyeliner there. So that's going to start to help to get that feeling. And then also the corner of her eye comes down a little sooner. It kind of overlaps that corner of the eye. And then the inner corner of the eye here is just a little bit lower because she has a slight upward turn between the inner and outer rim of the eye, which you actually have in this eye here. It was just not as prominent in that right eye. So I would work on that shape a little bit. And then on this eye, yeah, it's a little tricky, but it's kind of the same thing. The peak is over this direction. And I would just make sure that the eyes feel like they're both centered on the viewer. So you might need to nudge that one over a little bit. But I think most of it has to do with this angle there. And it's a little more subtle than what I've drawn, but sometimes I'll exaggerate just to prove a point. Okay, so yeah, I would just look at that shape a little bit more closely. And of course she has the eyeliner on that side too, which does give the feeling of the eye lifting in that corner a little bit higher. Okay, so just readdress that shape a little bit. She also has on this angle a cast shadow shape down here that merges with the shadow on the side of the face, so don't forget to indicate a little bit of that shape there because it's from her eyelashes, and it'll help just add to that sense of the lighting and the direction of the light. Looking at the mouth, the corner just feels like it sits a little bit low. So I would bring that corner up. So let's take a quick look at the photo. Yeah, that's pretty close. It's a little shorter too. So when I'm drawing the mouth too, I look at 3 primary points. I look at the corners, and then I look at that center line there because it helps me get the sense of foreshortening, especially in a 3/4 angle on the mouth. Now this is a painting class, so I didn't focus as much on proportion and anatomy of the features because I had gone over that in my charcoal portrait class more in depth, because that's a drawing class and that focuses more on that. But if you guys are having trouble with that, let me know and I can upload a couple of diagrams to the student portal from my charcoal class that might help you with some of the features. So just looking at where those corners sit, you can see yours is down here. So just raise that mouth up, and you might need to bring these corners up and to the left a little bit fuller to give her a little more fuller upper lip. I think where you have the bottom lip is good. And then just make sure that when you're drawing the features, you have the tilt between the eyes. Just make sure that this right nostril sits on the same tilt as the mouth and the eyes. We need all the tilts to feel parallel to one another. Okay, so let's see. Let me take one last look. The hair shape got a little big, so it looks like where you had this line is more accurate. So don't worry about the little curls coming up. I would look for some of the angularity too in here and bring these lines in just a little bit. So that way when we're in the transfer, your lines are kind of hidden inside the hair mass and you can paint some of these little wisps outside of the hair mass. And then in her jawline, look for that angularity. She has a kind of a square angle here in the jaw. It's just that corner there that you want to look for. Everything else feels pretty good. Okay, so those are all of my suggestions. If you have any questions, just again send me an email. And those of you kind of tuning in a little bit later, I'm going to be sending you my edits by email after the critique is over. All right, Lori, I'll include a couple of diagrams I'll try and upload them to our handout section for this week. I have a couple of diagrams on planes and you know, of the features. Of course, I go more in depth, but in this class I didn't have enough time to really go in depth on that. But I'll go ahead and include some of those this week. Just look in the download section. Also, I know some of you have been asking if there's going to be photo references without the grid. Those are in our lesson today. So when you look after the videos, you'll see a download section for the new photo references. They're still in black and white, and if you prefer a color version, I'll be providing those a little bit later. I'll provide those next week. But this is just to help you get that basic feeling with the black and white photo, and there's no grid to kind of distract you. So make sure you look for those downloads. All right, Janine, are you with us, Janine? I think I saw you in here earlier. Okay. Hi, how are you? Welcome to the class. Okay, so yeah, your drawing looks really nice. Now, did you do your grid on a sheet of paper underneath the drawing? Yeah, I was just, okay, so it's just lighter. Okay, so yeah, you have a really nice likeness in the drawing, and I don't see too many things. Her nose feels a little rounded, maybe. She has a little bit more of like an alkaline kind of shape in her nose. You can kind of see there's an angle kind of here, and this is a little more straight, and then it bumps out, but it's not real, you know, rounded and kind of bulbous on the end. So just kind of look for some of that slight change. Hold on, I need to do this on a new layer. Okay, so let me redraw that in. Yeah, you're really, really close. I think it's more having to do with the roundedness of your lines and also where you indicate that shadow shape and that underplane kind of coming in. So just make, and also I think this coming in a little far is making that exaggerated just a little bit. So just to give her a little bit more of a slender kind of feel to her nose, I would maybe just make that a little bit more subtle. Oh, okay. Yeah, if you take the photo and you just open it on your computer, you should be able to hit like edit and then adjust the brightness. So try doing that, and if you're still having trouble, just let me know and I can lighten the photo for you. And prints always print darker than prints always go a little bit darker than they look on the monitor. So if yours is looking a little bit dark in the print, you might try lightening it and reprinting or just working from a screen. So if you need me to lighten it for you, just let me know and I'll send you a lightened photograph. Yeah, so it could be a little hard to see in some of these areas exactly where that line is if your photo is a little too dark. Her eyes feel slightly large, but I think it might be that your line that you have in the eye is the outside of her eyeliner. It's really, really subtle, so just remember when you transfer that that's the outside of the eyeliner, and then you'll have your dark line kind of, the lashes kind of a little bit lower. And that can be kind of hidden and concealed in the oil painting phase, so if you don't want to mess with the drawing too much, because it's a very small amount, then you can just kind of leave it as it is and just remember that when you... Okay, yeah, the mouth is a little bit tricky. Let me take a look at that real quick. So we have the corner. Now on this side, it is a little bit tricky because she has a slight cast shadow and the corner of her mouth actually sits in here. So with a dark photo, you wouldn't have been able to see some of that difference in the photo. So let's take a look. Yeah, your placement is not too far off. It seems like you're pretty good. I would just make sure that when you indicate your shadow shape that you have a little bit of that cast shadow down here when you transfer. That way you remember to bring that down, because if you bring the light out too far, it'll change the appearance of her lip shape. But yeah, those are my suggestions. When it comes to areas that are in the light mass, you want to be careful about putting lines in areas like this because it's okay to have a small indication in your transfer, but just be careful about doing really solid lines in the light mass, because, or like if you wanted to indicate her cheekbone, you know, you would maybe indicate a little bit of the overlap, but leave that for more of the tonal stage, or else you're going to be trying to hide a dark line from the transfer. So just keep that in mind. And then with the hair, like I've been saying to everyone, just kind of bring that down so that way you have your transfer line a little bit inside, and then when you go in and paint, you can bring out some of your curls and some of the little wisps, because they're really fine, and so the main mass of her hair is in, sorry, my layers got mixed up. So you have the main mass of the hair kind of in here, and then there's these little kind of wispy curls that come out from that main mass. So that's what we want to transfer, and then these can be kind of painted in after. Does that make sense? You're welcome. All right. Good job. All right, one more. Marina? Are you here, Marina? I hope I'm saying your name right. Please correct me if I say it wrong. Okay, so looking at your drawing, really nice likeness already. There are just a few things that I feel are making her head almost feel maybe small, but I think it's mostly that the features are a little larger within that mask shape. So like when I kind of go back and forth between the two, you can kind of see that her eyes are positioned a little higher and also a little bit larger. And I couldn't quite see exactly where your grid was, but I see, I do see a line from like here to, I assume, I think somewhere over here. Yeah, that looks about right. So what you can tell though is that the eye mass, if you look over the photo here, the eye mass is quite large and it kind of fills that space. I think this line too is about there. So I'm just drawing those in so I can see them a little bit better. I think actually where you have the eyebrow positioned seems okay. I just feel like the eye needs to grow by just a small amount on both eyes. So let me bring the photo. So yeah, you can see the top of the eye, the bottom of the eye. I know it's a little hard to see this inner corner. Try lightening the photo just so you can see a little bit better. And of course her lid is above that line. And then her mouth, I'm just going to mark those corners there. And I think where you had the nose position seemed pretty good. To me, the main thing looked like the eyes needed adjusting. So yeah, you have the nose maybe a touch low. It should be maybe a little bit shorter. Looks like your mouth is pretty spot on except for this corner here. So I would make sure that you position that outer corner on the right. But mostly it's that the eyes need to come up and be just a little bit larger. So here's my marks for the eye here, and the outer corner was out here. And that will help lock everything into place. Because overall, your width and like your position of the ear and the hair and everything seems really, really close. The lower body got a little bit large. So if you look at position of the shoulder, and maybe the width across the chest, the armpits, and then the pit of the neck. Those are kind of key points to kind of look for. So you can see here on the right, your shoulder's a little bit wide. On the left, it seems okay. And your armpit on the right is a little bit wide. The left is close enough. So I'll erase those. You don't need to correct that. And your position of the neck on the left side is good. You just might need to adjust the position on the right side a little bit, just narrow it down. Okay, after you make those changes, you'll be ready to transfer. Everything looks great. Really nice job. And I'll reiterate just before you guys transfer, make sure your lines on your drawing after you've made your corrections, your finished lines are nice and dark, or else you might not be able to see, especially if you're using tracing paper instead of the vellum paper, because the vellum's a little bit thicker. It can go really dark on the back, and then suddenly you're having a hard time seeing your drawing. So go over your drawing maybe with either a ballpoint pen or even just a really dark pencil. Sometimes I'll just go over mine with a black colored pencil just so that I can make sure I can see it. And then I'll use a different colored pencil to do the transfer, or I'll use a ballpoint pen like I do in the demonstration. So just keep that in mind when you guys are preparing your drawings for transfer, okay? So it's 12:30, and I was going to take a 5-minute break, but since not everyone in Group B submitted, there's only a few people left. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Group B. Feel free to tag along. I'm not going to break, but I think next time I'll end up taking a brief break where I'll go offline and then I'll come back on, just so that these critiques don't drag out too long. But are there any quick questions I can answer about the process or about your drawings? I'm sure there will be questions after you guys watch the new videos. Disposal of Gamsol. Yeah, you don't need to throw out your Gamsol every time. Just put it in a jar with a nice airtight lid, and you'll need it for cleaning your brushes occasionally. If you're wanting solvent-free kind of workspace, some of you have said you're working in a kind of a small room, get some walnut oil to clean your brushes. Just make sure you're not getting too much oil mixed into your paint, so always drying off your brush after cleaning it in the oil. Gamsol, you never want to dump it down the sink. It will kind of self-clean. So what I like to do is when my Gamsol gets too dirty, I will dump it into a jar that I keep just for that. And then I just set it on the shelf, and within a couple of days, all the sediment will settle at the bottom. And then you can pour the clean Gamsol back into your brush canister. So never dump it out. Just you can kind of recycle it until it's gone. And a little bit later this week, I didn't get a time to do it before our lesson, but I'm going to do a brief video. I'll probably just post it on YouTube and send everyone a link. But I'll talk about brush care, keeping your brushes in good condition, and how I go about cleaning my brushes really well. And I'll talk a little bit about the different soaps you can use and a technique I use to get all the paint out of the ferrule of the brush. So I'll post that on our Facebook page, but also I'll just have it on YouTube and email everyone a link on that. All right, so any other questions before we jump over? All right. Lori, are you with us, Lori? Yep, there you are. I see you. Are you still here? All right. So the main thing I see in the portrait, I think you have the overall size right. I think you have her face shape pretty good. Is mostly the nose and the mouth. Thanks, Dominique. Yeah, any questions you guys have about the new videos, I'll kind of be interacting with you guys on Facebook, but also you can also comment below the video, and I'll try and get back to you right away. So, Lori, I think the nose is just a little bit long, and maybe a little bit too, not necessarily the spacing here. Oh, let me create a new layer. Not necessarily the spacing over between the tip of the nose and the cheek, not this, but I feel like maybe the width across the nose here to here feels a little wide. So let me pull up the photo real quick. So kind of flashing between the two, you can see that you have the eyes pretty good in terms of the space and placement, but the mouth and the nose need to go up just a bit. So I'm going to mark out just the widths. Okay, and I'm just going to mark the widths there. Okay. All right, so can you see that okay? It's in the red. So I think it's not by very much as far as the width here to here. You can see you can bring it over to the right just a little bit, but it's mostly the width here and the height. So I think you brought this part down a little bit too far. And then as a result, you pushed the mouth down too far. So looking at the mouth, it should be around there. And I'm just going to draw kind of the generic shape, okay, for placement. And one thing that will help is to look at the distance between this grid line and the corner of the mouth. Just because I'm using the grid too doesn't mean that I don't go through and do some comparative measurement. So one thing you could do is measure on, you know, your photograph to see what the, for example, you can use the eye as a general kind of idea for comparing a certain space. For example, this space here. I usually just try and find something that matches or that can give me some kind of cue for placement in addition to the grid, because it's not that you didn't have it in the same proximity to this grid line here, this diagonal line, it's just that it was not the right proximity in height. So sometimes that can throw us off if we're just using these diagonals to help us position. Let me take another peek. Okay, so I think just looking at the position of the ear, I think that's only thrown off because the ear relates to the nose and the mouth and the eyes. In this photo, we're kind of looking up at her slightly, so normally the top of the ear is somewhere between the eye and the eyebrow, and the nose and the mouth is somewhere where the bottom of the ear sits, but that just depends on the perspective. So I would just adjust that because it looks like yours came down a little bit far. So there's the new one and your line is down here. And even though it's hard to see, I would indicate where at least the back of her jaw is. Let me draw it in white on the photo so we can see. So it's kind of there, and we have a slight overlap there. And of course, this is her shadow shape, but it will just help you when you're in the painting stage to judge some of those smaller spaces. When you get into the transfer, one of the things you don't want to get caught up in is transferring highlights. It's tempting to want to do that, but the problem with that is with the technique we'll be using, we're going to be starting by placing a scumble of white in those lighter areas. So I would just say don't worry about the placement. What you want to focus more on is the placement of the shadow shape. So her shadow shape is like that. I'll do that in white. Okay, and she has a little bit of a darker tone here, but I wouldn't outline that because it's not as distinct as this shape here. You do have the cast shadow marked, and I do see some of that shadow shape here already indicated. So maybe one that you don't need is this one here in the temple and closer to the cheek. It looks like you were indicating some of the mid-tone, but because of the way we're going to be doing the painting, those lines will start to come through the paint and they're going to kind of fight you a little bit. So, and we don't want that. So just transfer your shadow shapes and some of the contours of the portrait. Even on the contour of this nose here, what I would transfer is more like that and maybe like this shape, right? So the cast shadow, and then of course anything within that shadow shape is fine. I would indicate that little mark and that should be enough for you to move into the painting stage and get the right size of the nose. If you put a really solid line all the way up this bridge of the nose, the line might start to come through in your final painting. And same goes for the lip. Like whenever you have a slightly softer lost edge, you don't need to worry about indicating some of these softer shapes. Try to just stick to the main dark masses, like that shape. And you can indicate a line or two for the light mass on the upper lip, but try to keep it more of maybe a broken edge. Okay, does that make sense? So same thing goes in here, like when you're down in this this area here, you don't need to transfer these lines. Just focus on transferring the cast shadow line from on the neck. You don't even need to indicate this one here, just the contour and this cast shadow. Okay, good. Yeah, if you're not sure on what to transfer or what to leave out, just you know, kind of edit your drawing and send me another photo by email, and I'll just let you know if there's any I think you don't need to include in the transfer. With regards to the ear, I know it's kind of like half in light, half in shadow. When I did a drawing of this reference, I just pushed the whole ear into shadow. It's something you might consider doing just to keep the portrait a little bit more simple and not create a little confusing shape. Our whole goal here is to create a great painting and not necessarily a photographic copy, even though we're obviously using photographs to work from. We're wanting to create a great painting, so I like to sometimes edit things that maybe are in the photo but I don't think will read or come across very well in the painting. Kind of using artistic license to you know, adjust certain things that might just read better in the long run. Sorry, I had to adjust my mic there for a second. Okay, so yeah, really nice job. Just get those positioned, and if you need me to take another look at the features, just send me a photo of your drawing once you've made some of the corrections before you transfer. Okay? I look forward to seeing your painting. All right, Susan? Are you in here, Susan? All right, she might not be here. So, all right, nice likeness in the portrait. A few things kind of jump out at me. I think the eyes maybe got a little large for the eye socket shape. If you look at the shape of her eyebrow, I think you got the eyebrow shape pretty good. You might have increased the arch on her brow a little bit, maybe extreme, but it's the position and size of the eye within that socket that's making it feel maybe a little bit large for her particular likeness. Also, just overall, the face feels maybe a little wide, but I think it's more having to do with the left side of the face than the right side. So let me take a quick look at that. Oh, you're very welcome, Laurie. I just saw your comment. Okay, so let's take a quick look. And I know you had some questions too, so I'll bring those up because I thought they were good questions and everyone might want to hear the answers to them. So I'm going to just take a quick look at the position of the left side of the face in a general sense of the size, okay, and where that shadow shape sits. And then looking at the size of the eye. And I'm just going to hit that peak of the brow just so I can see a comparison really quick. Okay, so let me take that off. Okay, so you can see that the left side of the face is a little bit wide, but where you have the right side of the jaw is in a good spot. So I would leave the right side of the jaw where it is, and I would bring in the left side of the face. Doesn't mean the hair doesn't come out a little bit wider, because that's what's happening here. You can kind of see that on the right side here. But the position of the eyes does sit a little bit high, but it seems like you have the eyebrows pretty well positioned. If this arc is the highest peak, that mark here, it could be that your eyebrow on the left side needs to come down, because there should be this upward tilt between the features. So if I were to match that on that tilt, and tilts are always tricky. It's kind of more about making sure the features themselves are in general relating on the same tilt. So even if you got the tilt of the head off, for example, it's okay. I know there was a student who had that earlier, so long as your features are relating on a correct tilt to each other. Okay, so here's where I see the eyes positioned. So it looks like they got pushed a little high, and then this eyebrow is probably going to come down. But let me, instead of guessing, let me just double check that. She looks kind of evil with the red. All right, so let me, and also probably what's making it hard too is this left side is pretty much all in shadow, so we have not just the eyebrows, but we have this large shadow shape. And of course the lid is up there. Okay. I'm just going to place a few more marks so I can see, because as soon as we get the eyes off, it's easy for the other features to kind of get thrown off a little bit. So it looks like your nose is in the right spot. That's good news. So I'll erase those. The only part that needs adjusting is right here, where you have that come in. So you're going to just bring that in and to the left, or sorry, to the right just a little bit. The mouth, again, it has to do with that tilt relationship, making sure all these features are related on the same tilt. So just reassess some of these points. I think the mouth goes a little wider on the right. Here's the center line. So it looks like you might have pushed the mouth a little bit to the left. So when you put in the little cupid's bow of the mouth, make sure you use that center line here. And then this is the other corner of the mouth. So it's just a little bit shorter than on the left side than what you had. Okay, and a little bit lower. Where you have the bottom lip is perfect, so I'm going to remove that. Yeah, so you can see the brow shape should come down, and then she'll have enough space in that forehead for the hair. And like I've suggested for everyone else, you might consider bringing this line down just a little bit, just so that you have room to kind of bring out the curls with paint instead, and it'll help hide the line for the hair. Looking at the jawline, I would definitely show that there's a little bit of an overlap there. It's probably a little hard to see in the photo, but if you lighten the photo, you should be able to see it a little bit. And with regards to the ear, the only shape you really need to worry about transferring are these little shadows. And maybe I always like to indicate like this one here, but I won't always draw all of these. It kind of depends on whether or not I feel like I can hide that in the painting process. So work on getting the eyes into position first. Like I said, it looks like your nose is pretty good. So I would leave that, just work on the left side of the nose and the mouth, and then you'll be ready for transfer. Everything else looks great. And if you have any questions or follow-up questions, just send me a quick email before you transfer. And that goes for everyone. If you guys make corrections in your drawing and you want me to take one last brief look at it before you transfer, then just send it to me in an email. All right. Dee, are you here, Dee? You can kind of, if you're on a desktop computer, you can type into the chat box to the right of the video. Kate had said that she wasn't able to see the chat box if you're just tuning in. If you're on mobile or on maybe a iPad or something, you might not be able to see the chat box. Just letting everyone know. Okay, so Dee, if you do have any follow-up questions and you can't chat with me right now, just send them to me by email afterwards. And everyone will be getting an email from me today after the critique is over with a photo of my edits, so that you'll have that to work from. And then about an hour or so after our live stream has ended, you'll be able to come back and rewatch through my channel if you need, just to kind of refresh your memory on my suggestions. Okay, so I'll get back to some of the questions too that were in some of your files at the end of this session too, because I think they're questions that everyone would kind of like to hear. Okay, so let me pull this up. Okay, so I'm just kind of flashing between the two to see where I am picking up some of the major differences. Okay, so one of the things I see is partly the position of the ear. Okay. It feels like it was a little bit narrow and it was pinching the right side of the face a little bit. So let's see where that actually sits. And then I also see a little bit more fullness in her chin. And then the position of the eyes might need some adjustment. The eyes are kind of the anchor in our portrait, so we want to make sure we get those in the right, position, and they help us with all of the other features of the face. So I always try to get the eyes, anchored in pretty early in my drawing, because I base a lot of my other features off of the position of the eyes. Okay, so your right eye seems pretty good. You might have made it a little long. I think mostly what it is the position of the iris needs to come a little bit further back. You have yours over here to the left. And then the position of this far left eye seems just a little bit off. You can see your line is up there for the lash line, and it should be down here, and then this should be where you have your eyelid. Position of the brows seems pretty good, so I'll erase that. The nose is really close. I think it's close enough. And your corners placements for the mouth is pretty good, but the shape of her mouth is a little off. Part of that is the way it relates to the chin, so make sure you kind of fill out her chin a little bit more. Right now you have it kind of indenting there, and I would bring that out. Oh, thank you for mentioning that. So on the computer screen, if you are in full screen, you won't be able to see the chat box, so minimize it to see the chat box. So those of you watching full screen, if you can't see the chat box, minimize the screen and you should see it pop up on the right. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so with the mouth, let's take a look a little bit closer at the shape. That will help you get more likeness. I think you just gave her too full of an upper and lower lip. So when I'm drawing this model, she does have a very full lower lip, but I also see this secondary rim, which might be useful in capturing the likeness. And also it's important to note where the cast shadow, or the little form shadow, is for the upper lip. Okay, and then the actual crease in her mouth is up here, and she has a little cast shadow there. So if you're having trouble seeing some of these things in your reference, everybody's monitor is different, and everybody's printer is different, so your photo might be printing a little dark and you have a hard time seeing it. So try lightening the photo just to make it a little easier on yourself, but always keep a copy of the original, because that's the one you want to use for your value reference. But just for being able to see inside those shapes that are darker, it might be useful to lighten it enough to where you can see. So just taking that away, you can see that your shape is kind of scooping here in the upper lip, and it's a little bit more arched. Okay, so that's just the subtle difference. It looks like you have the bottom lip placed really well. It's just I would not suggest putting like this full outline here. Allow there to be a break in the line right through this section right here, because it's a softer edge in the painting and you don't want a real hard outline. Just try to focus on where you see some of the contours or the cast shadows. And you can see that this part here is the fuller part of the lip. Alright, so really nice job. You might have brought her hair out a little far here. Actually, no, I think you need to bring a little more width right in through here. And I would note a little bit of her part, because this is like the hair kind of pushing up in volume, And then we have a little kind of cowlick at the back of the head. I would make that maybe not necessarily bigger, but just give yourself some variety to that shape a little bit. And then her hair's really kind of broken up over here, so because of the curls. So just when you transfer your line, either transfer kind of a looser broken line or bring your line in enough to where you could paint some of those wisps in with your brush instead of having like a hard line. Okay. Don't forget to add a little bit of the armpit there. Everything else looks great. So yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, just send me an email. I look forward to seeing your painting. All right, Sahar, are you with us? I hope I'm saying your name right. Let me know if I am not. The photo you sent me is a little blurry. I'll do my best, but next time try to make sure the camera is in focus. I can work with it, but just for the best results, try to get a little bit sharper image. That way I'm not telling you to correct things that don't need correcting, but your lighting on it is great, so that's good. Okay, so let me bring up some of the photo reference. So one of the things I'm feeling kind of when I go back and forth between these is the left cheek feels maybe a little narrow, and the nose position. So I'm going to start with the nose position because that could be affecting how I perceive the left cheek distance. So I just want to look at that position there. And then of course the position of the right eye. I'm just going to place some dots to help me see where yours is sitting. Okay, so it looks like your right eye, it starts in the right spot, but it needs to be a little bit bigger, a little more open. Okay? And that's going to move your iris over. And you see me flashing between these photos, right? Well, this is something I do in real life too. Whether I'm working from a live model or I'm working from a photograph, I will step back from my drawing. Sometimes I'll look in a mirror, like a little hand mirror. Sorry, that was my dog. Go on. Go, 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 go. They like getting under the desk when I'm sitting here. So what was I saying? Oh, so what I'll do is I'll step back from my drawing and I'll kind of flick my eyes between my photo and my drawing very quickly, kind of just glancing at each one, very much the way I do this. And I'll focus on a point that I feel like it needs correcting, for example, the eye. And I'll just kind of flash my eyes back and forth until I start to see some of the differences. And it's a very useful technique. So you don't have to have a computer to do something like this. You can just sit there with your photo and kind of flash your eyes between, or use a mirror to look at your drawing in reverse. That's a very useful tool. So like a little hand mirror, step away from your drawing with your back to your drawing, look in the mirror and look at your drawing and reference in reverse. And oftentimes you'll see things that jump out at you because our eyes get accustomed to what we're looking at when we've been working on a drawing for a long time. And it becomes harder and harder to kind of see some of the corrections. So your eyebrows seems very, very close. I would say just open that right side up a little bit, and that should lock in the right eye. And you can definitely see that you've straightened out the nose a little bit too much. And that's affecting the way we see the space here. So let me now check just to make sure you have given her enough fullness on the left cheekbone. And then I'm going to look for the corner position of the mouth. Okay, so it does need a little bit more width here on the left side of the face. It looks like the right side here is just right, so I'm going to leave that alone. But I would say definitely work on bringing that out a little wider. And one of the things that will help make that feel better, because it might feel off to bring that out, is that you need to open up the width of the mouth. If you kind of look at the photo here and I draw a vertical line straight down from the tip of the nose, it should line up with the corner of the mouth. Okay, so that's what you want to make sure you have. And you probably had that here, but your nose was too small and too straight up and down. Okay, so looking at that position of the lips, and of course give her a little bit more of a fuller lip, and since the center line is here, just make sure you're getting the right shape for the foreshortening of the lip. In fact, I'm going to adjust that real quick. So the corner of her mouth is in there. There's a little cast shadow there. Okay, position there. I would mark this here just with a little mark. I would not outline the whole lip. I would just indicate that and then that, because you want to have some of the softness there, and if you have an outline, it's going to be a little harder to hide that when we get into the painting. So something like that should help you get closer of a likeness, and then you're going to end up moving your shadow shape probably out just a little bit. Okay, you'll have to redraw that because of where we've moved the left side of the mouth. So I think it's mostly her cheekbone that needs widening, maybe not so much in the lower jaw. That's feeling a little better. Just wanted to thin out that line so you could see it a little better. And then, like I suggested with almost everyone else, just make sure you bring your line in for the main hair mass here. Leave a little bit of space so that you can see that this almost goes straight up from the ear and you have it kind of pulling out to the right. Just leave a little bit of space there because we want to have room to bring the little wisps of the hair out with paint, not for the transfer. The spacing here seems a little short, so I would look again at where like this shape here sits, this one here. I think my feeling is that it's a little higher. And then it comes back down to where you have it placed. Now it's important to note that this is her curl, right? But there's also a shadow there, so be just aware. You don't have to make them too distinct, but just be aware of that, that spacing there. Okay, so those are my suggestions. If you have any questions, then just send me an email. All right. David. Oops. Are you with us, David? All right, so I see that you put your thirds lines in there. That's good. Yeah, you have a really nice likeness. There's not too many things I see. The main one that kind of jumps out to me is the position of the eyebrow. Feels a little high on the head. It seems like where you placed your line should be the peak of the brow. So like this line here that you have, you might need to make her brow arch just a little bit less. Okay, so bringing that down just a little bit more. Let me do that in a layer real quick. So you can kind of see the peak of her brow is here. So let's see where that sits on your drawing. Yeah, so that's about where it is. But I think your eye is pretty on the mark. Yeah, so you have the eye pretty well positioned. I would pay attention to where that little point of the tear duct sits in comparison to the outer corner of her eye so that you have that slight upward tilt between the inner corner and outer corner. But the eyes overall should still relate on that tilt that you have kind of drawn in. So let me check the other eye real quick. Okay, so that left eye and brow is a little bit high. So you're going to want to move that shape down. Okay? So here is the brow shape, and here is the eye shape. Okay? You can leave the right eye where it is, but you'll want to adjust the left eye. And that's going to actually bring back that sense of the tilt, because I see your tilt lines here, but your brow raises above that tilt. Part of that's because that one did as well. But this eye was sitting up too high, and that tilt was like this, which is slightly skewed. So you lower the left eye and it should lock right in. Once you get the eyes locked in, it'll be easier to check the position of the nose. It seems really close, but I think you might have brought this line down too far. This should be the very lowest point, so the nose kind of comes up from that lowest point. So your line here for that thirds mark seemed really close, but then you brought the nose. Let me look at that line again. So you have your line, it looks like around here. Yeah, so you had the line actually for the nose in the right spot, but I think maybe the nostrils got pushed a little low. Try to ignore the nose ring in the beginning. And then just make sure there's always this upturn angle between, between the ball of the nose and that underplane. So what I'm talking about is that. So look for that shape in your drawing. So it should be something like that. So it could just be that your contours are a little off, and then this should just have a slight overlap there. For some reason it was looking like the nose ring was the bottom of the nose, but I think actually your nose is pretty close. It's feeling only a little long just because of this bridge leading into the brow. And then I'm just looking at those 3 points. Those are the 3 points I tend to focus on. Oh, I drew those on the wrong layer. That's why they're disappearing. Okay, so let me remark those. Okay, so yeah, you're not far off. This should be the corner of the mouth. So you maybe went a little wide and high with that. And it looks like your inner corner of the mouth is just right within that shadow shape, so you're probably good there. I would just indicate it a little bit more solid for your transfer. Don't worry about transferring lines like this. So that was probably just your frame of reference, but just make sure when you're ready to transfer that you don't worry about some of those lines or even the smile line in the light mask. Leave those out. You can give yourself like a tiny mark, but try to keep it pretty simple for the transfer. Okay? All right, good job, and I look forward to seeing your painting. All right. Sean, are you with us, Sean? I know it probably helps you to see. Oh, there you are. It helps you to see your shapes when they're toned, and I totally understand that. But what you might do just to make things simpler for you is take an additional sheet of transfer paper and lay that on top, and then just trace your contours once you've made adjustments to your drawing, because sometimes these shapes can hide where your actual contours are when we coat the back of the paper, because that makes it even darker. So, or you might just go over, you could even just on this sheet go over your lines with maybe a marker, a thin, fine point marker, just so you know exactly what lines you're transferring. And it just makes it less risky for losing a sense of your drawing when you're doing the transfer. Okay, so let me take a quick look between the two. You have a pretty good likeness. Her nose is feeling a little more downturned than it actually is. So if I flash kind of between these two, you can start to see some of that. And I think the lip might have dropped a little bit as well. So what I want you to do is use this eye here as kind of your anchor point for your drawing. You're going to use that eye because it's really in the correct spot and you have a good shape on it. So I would use that to help you find the position of the mouth. Where you have this corner, let me check that real quick. Okay, so if you look at the corner here, and then the position, I'm going to just mark the width of the nose and the height. And then you want to look for how, if you drew it like a straight line down, how does it relate to the corner of the mouth? Or you could even look exactly where the corner of the mouth sits. And bring that line straight up, and you'll see it lines up with her iris, okay? And your line is over here. So you can see that the opening of the mouth needs to come up just a little bit. And then same thing for the nose. And what probably happened is when you positioned the bottom of the nose down here, you pushed everything down, and it kind of made the chin feel a little bit small. So by the time you bring the nose up, yeah, so there's always like this little connection there, and you bring the nose out and push this over just a little bit. It should give you another reference point for positioning the other corner of the mouth. With regards to the height, one of the components you can kind of look for is notice how the bottom of her cast shadow shape from the bottom lip touches your grid line, just barely, but this upper portion doesn't. Okay, so, and it also should be a little bit more forward on the face, this direction. So that should help you get a little more volume into the mouth, and you get, and all, I mean, sorry, into the chin, and to help you get a little bit more likeness. Another thing that'll help is maybe bringing the neck forward a little bit. Look at where that overlap sits in relationship to the face. So if you bring that down, it almost lines up with the corner of the nose, the nostril. So you want to make sure you bring that neck forward. But then if you did that, it would make her neck too wide, so this part needs to come in as well. I think as soon as you lock the nose and the lips in, you're going to get her likeness pretty quick. So just make sure you include that shadow shape under the nose. Obviously, I simplified this shape just so that you could see where the position is. You will have a little bit more subtle contouring to her nose in the end, but focus on position first, and that will help. A lot of times when we think of the likeness of the model, we get focused on the details and some of those subtler shapes and, you know, little ins and outs. For example, the little ins and outs on her nose. But really, it's more about structure and overall placement that gives the likeness to someone. So if you think about looking at someone who's, you know, a friend, for example, who's at the end of your block, or, you know, they're several, you know, 100 feet away from you, and you still recognize them. Well, why is that? You can't see her details. You can't see, you know, some of the details of their face, but you recognize them. Well, part of the reason you recognize them is the hair shape and the face, or what I call the mask shape, the bone structure of the face, and the proportions, you know, placement of features. That's what helps us to recognize someone from far away. We're not seeing those little details. We're seeing the bigger picture. So that's what you kind of want to think of when you're starting with the drawing. So you asked, is her left eye too low? Let me check that for you. I'm going to just draw lines across from the top to the bottom. And then I'm going to just mark inner corner, outer corner. Okay, so let's see where that sits. So yeah, it looks like here is where the eye should sit, and right now you have it too low. It looks like your right eye is on the mark. If that left eye is too low, that means that the eyebrow is also too low. So let's just look at that position. So there you go. That's, yeah, it is a little bit too low, but the right one seems like it's in the right spot. Okay, so I also do feel a little bit more length in her forehead, not by very much, but maybe a little bit higher right in this spot. Let me check that. Yeah, so a little more height right in this area for the head, and I don't think you need to bring this up necessarily. Leave the hair where it is, but bring the hairline up a little bit. And then I think this comes over in the right spot. So this is just her part in her hair. Okay, so let me take one last look. If the eyes were a little off, the ear might also be a little bit off, just because the ear relates to the features. So that's the position of the ear. It's not off by very much. I think you can make it a little taller. And where you had the bottom was just fine. So just make the ear a little bit taller and maybe a little wider, and that should do it. And then a little bit wider maybe in the hairline right in here. Because she has like this little wisp of hair here, I would not worry about putting that in. Get the main kind of arc of her hairline here. That little wisp here is just something you can indicate with paint. You don't want a real hard line there in your transfer. Okay, really nice job though. And do you have any other questions? Just make sure the lines that you're going to be transferring are very clear. Even if you just draw over this, make sure you have like an actual outline for the brow and the shadow shape so that you know exactly what you're going to be tracing into your painting. You're very, very welcome. All right, good job. All right, last one. Nelia, are you here, Nelia? I hope I'm saying your name right. If you're here, you can, oh, there you are. Hi, Nelia. Am I saying your name right? Is it Nalia? With an A or an E? Nelia? Okay, sorry. Okay. All right, so let me take a quick look here. Yeah, your drawing was really close. I didn't find too much, just a slight adjustment maybe in the shape of the mouth. And her eyes, I feel like, could be just a little bit bigger. She has very... Nelia, like that? Nelia? Sorry. Yeah, let's... mostly in the forehead, I think, is where the corrections need to be made. So let me just do a few marks here. Looking at the overall position of the hair. And then I think her mouth has just a little more of an upturn. And I'm just going to put some dots for the opening of the eye, just so we can see and make sure the eyes are kind of anchored in. Okay, so it looks like, yes, the hair can come down. It's not by very much. Look at the kind of simplicity of that shape. Part of it is the width here. So I would narrow that down just a little bit and look at how that kind of translates over and transitions. That will help make this a little bit more symmetrical. Head-on views are always tricky with that way. I think her hair shape now has the appropriate width, so I don't think you need to adjust that. With the eyes, yeah, I think just a hair smaller, or lower actually, not necessarily smaller. I think you could probably leave the top pretty close to where it is, but just open this up a little bit more. Let me get a little more specific with that shape, so because you're really, really close. So if we look, the inner corner is here. We have the iris, and it kind of depends on what you choose to draw in. I usually draw a little bit of the inner rim and a little bit of the lash line, right? So I draw the water line of the eye. If I can see it under the lash line on the upper lid, I will also indicate it there. But it depends on how large you're drawing too, because if you're drawing kind of small, there's not going to be much room for fitting that in. Okay, and then I'll just double check the placement of the brow. Okay, so let's take a quick look at that. Okay. Yeah, not very far off. So the main thing I see is actually bringing this part a little bit lower, the iris, and also this one on the right, bringing the iris over to the left a little bit more. Your tear ducts are almost in the right spot. This one can just kind of point down on the left side. It can kind of come down a little bit. It looks like your one on the right, though, is in the right spot. So mostly on that one. And that will actually kind of help with keeping her eyes from feeling like they're looking in like a little bit separated. With regards to the mouth, you have a really nice mouth shape. I would just kind of do a little bit of the upturn here in the corners. So your corners of the mouth are just going to adjust a little bit. She has kind of like that shape. That's how I would simplify it. And I wouldn't bother outlining the whole thing. I would just indicate maybe where you see the dark shape and then these corners to get that shape correct. I would indicate 1 or 2 marks there and then the cast shadow there. So it looks like your mouth needs to come up a little bit to kind of close off that space there between the nose and the mouth. Okay, that should all lock in her likeness really well, and then just make sure that you're going through and also including, I know there isn't a real strong like shadow shape on her face. There's a little bit of one here. I would indicate maybe just the overlap that you see there for the cheekbone, and then make sure you have this shadow edge and this overlap from the jawline. Make sure you have both, because or else you might end up making this space too small when you're in the painting stage. And of course, any cast shadows that you see like from the eyelashes, just kind of give yourself an indication. I think you had the cast shadow and the form shadow on the nose. Yeah, your nose seems like it's in a good position, so you don't need to change anything on that. And yeah, so I think you're all set. Do you have any questions? So to become familiar with the face, would it make sense to do a drawing and then trace the lines that you want? Do you mean like over the photo, or do you mean like over your drawing? Over the drawing. I mean, that's one thing you could do. That's kind of what we will be doing when we transfer. Once you've made the edits to your drawing, you will be coating the back of your paper, but before you do that, you might want to go over your lines a little darker so they don't disappear when you transfer, so they're not too hard to see. So you'll see in the video today where you coat the back, and then we'll be transferring it to the canvas. Of course, you guys will all want to make your corrections beforehand. Before you transfer, you don't want to try and make the edits on the canvas. It's a little harder to do that. So correct your drawing, and then you just want the lines that you're going to transfer left on your paper. So if you, okay, you could do that. If it helps you, you could tape down your tracing paper on top of this drawing and make some of the edits, kind of like I did here with the red. Kind of use that as a guide. I'll be sending this out as an email to you with the drawing over this so that you can see what corrections I suggested. So if that makes it easier, yeah, especially because the tracing paper tends to be a little bit more delicate and it doesn't erase that great. It can wear down. Vellum tends to hold up a little bit longer, but it can still be kind of, if you did a lot of erasing, it can be kind of delicate. So if you need to, just, yeah, place another sheet of paper on top, and then you can make your corrections on that sheet. Just make sure everything that you're going to be actually transferring is on one page. That way you're not kind of juggling more than one page. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So I'm going to go back real quick because I know some of you had questions, and I think, Susan, you had the ones that I wanted to share with everyone. So I just wanted to bring those up and just read through them and talk with everyone a little bit about it. So, Susan, you were saying you had a hard time finding the forehead to gauge and the facial feature proportions. If you can't see the forehead, so I think what she's talking about is in the case of like the hair coming down, how do you kind of measure that from the eyebrows? So like standard proportions of the head, you have the thirds kind of rule from the eyebrow, center of the eyebrows to the forehead, usually where the hairline is. That's not always the most reliable or consistent proportional measurement because people's hairline varies greatly. So, and some people have bangs and that sort of thing. What I would suggest is making sure that you anchor the eyes where they are in your perspective. So typically eyes are at the middle of the head from the top of the hair to the chin. But someone who has like a taller hairstyle, or you know, if you have any perspective or foreshortening, you might end up not being able to see the distinction. So of where like the top of the head is or where the hairline is. So just use the eyes as your kind of anchor, and then from there it's a lot easier to kind of guess where the brows are, and then you can even use the eye socket to measure where the hair sits in relationship to not so much the forehead, but in proximity to the hair. So like for example, let's look at this picture here, see if I can explain that a little better. So looking at this drawing, or the photo reference here, I can kind of see her forehead in this section here. So I can use this point to help me decide where that sits. But because the hair comes down, I could use this distance here compared to this distance here to help me figure out how far down to bring the hair. Okay, does that make sense, guys? So yes, you're never going to have a perfect situation where you're drawing someone who has perfect proportions, or you don't have any distortion, or there's not no additional kind of hair mass at the top. So it's always about finding that comparative measurement or keeping the eyes kind of as that anchor in your drawing. So once you get the eyes positioned, everything else kind of comes after that. And yes, the proportion of the head begins on top of the head, the scalp, minus the volume of the hair, and the best way to find that. Again, it's kind of guesswork, but you could use this here. Oh, sorry, wasn't visible. So you can use this here to help you, because you can see part of her scalp there. Now we can't always see that, but you can kind of guess where the volume of the head sits there. But it almost doesn't matter what the standard proportion is, in the sense that in this case I could still use this, for example, where I'm going to draw this point as my top of the head, for example, and I can use that to compare the distance from here to here. I might not find that they're equal. I might find that this one is bigger. I might find that this one is smaller, depending on perspective. So if you're looking up at your model, you might see less of the top of the scalp or the hair. And so if someone has very flat hair, it's a little easier to see. But with curly hair, you can still compare where that main mass is. And are these equal? It just depends on your reference and your perspective. So just keep that in mind. It's always about comparative measurement. How do you measure the width of the face? Is it from ear to ear or side to side, excluding the ears? You could do either one. So again, back to the reference here. Because I can't quite see her other ear, what I would suggest doing, let me erase this real quick. What I would suggest doing is going from cheekbone to cheekbone and compare that to the height of the face. You might find that this distance is, a third or 2/3 of this distance. You might find that it's half. It really depends on the person and your angle on the head. You could also compare the overall width the same way, compare it to the height. So that's why it's called comparative measurement, because you're taking one section and using it as a unit of measurement to compare to another section, so that you can make sure you have the right ratio to the height versus the width of the face. Okay, so let's go to the third question. So she's saying, while I understood on how to find the tilt for the facial features, I'm not sure how to place the perpendicular line at the center of her nose and across her eyes, nose, and lips. Okay, so I can include an additional handout on that. This is not a drawing class, so I didn't really include that, but whenever I draw the head, I'm looking at that overall sense. Like, imagine the head is like a box. What direction is it tilting? And then your line is going to follow that tilt. And then the perpendicular line is always going to fall. One of the ways I look for it is I try to find the middle point between the brows. I ignore the tip of the nose, but I look for the middle point of where the nose connects to the muzzle. And then I look for the center point in the chin. And in this case, she has a little dimple there. I can use that as my center line. And then I just connect those with a somewhat straight line. The face is slightly curved, so it could be slightly curved line. Okay? But because there is a little bit of perspective on the face, this isn't always perfect. But it's something along those lines. Okay? If you look also, you can just find, one of the ways to find that is to look at the tilt between the eyes. So looking inner corner to inner corner. You can also look at corner of the mouth to the corner of the mouth, but some people might have an asymmetrical mouth. It's less likely that they'll have a lot of asymmetry in the eyes. So again, using the eyes as your anchor in your drawing is always really, really useful. So I would focus on getting your perpendicular lines for the eyes first. So you have your head shape, and then you get your proportional placement of the eyes and that tilt. And from there you can go in and start to divide up the other features. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Yeah, so tilt line, is it pretty accurate? How do you interpret it when someone is maybe smiling or smirking in a photo? You just have to take, like I said, use the eyes. They tend to change the least in terms of where they sit. They don't move up and down on the face. Like if you have someone smiling, the mouth lifts on the face and it changes the proportions a little bit. So the eyes do smile a little bit, but the whole structure of the eyeball socket doesn't move. So use that as kind of your guideline for placing everything and looking for the tilt. And the tear ducts don't really move. They squint if someone squints, but the position of your tear ducts don't really change. So use those as your guideline. Gauging the thirds and the halves, what would be an easier way to do it? Translate measuring a different size, reference photo, transfer my paper. Yeah, there's just no way for you to see exactly what I was doing as far as looking at my photo reference when I do my measurement. But one of the things I like to do is use a long skewer or something with a tilt where I can compare the tilts between certain points and do comparative measurement. There really isn't much of an easier way to do it. It's just triple checking. So it's kind of like when you cut or you're building something, they say measure twice, cut once. Same thing kind of goes with drawing. Just continuously check your measurements, and you can compare. For example, if I were having trouble with my thirds because the head is on a tilt in a situation like this, for example, I have all these tilts. How do I make sure I have, the tilt correct and the placement in terms of height? Well, we have this grid as well, right? We have our line down here and we have this line here. You could compare this distance to this distance. You can compare this distance, if you drew these lines in, to this distance. See how they compare. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach it. You just have to kind of get a little creative. And of course, studying the proportions of the human head is helpful. But like I said, you rarely ever have a perfect kind of situation where you don't have a challenging view of the model, or there's no foreshortening, or they have a perfectly flat hairstyle that's contours the head. There is some level of guessing, and there is some level of creativity in terms of how you're going to go about problem solving, and that's what drawing is. It's problem solving. So just trying to make sure you try different techniques, compare different areas, and don't get stuck on going through just one singular kind of approach. If something's kind of challenging you, try measuring it different, or try comparing it to something different. Like, for example, comparing a height to a width as opposed to the different thirds measurements. So the other question, some of the areas in the shadow, I think is what she's saying, are difficult to see. Do you ignore these and paint them dark? I look for what I can see, but sometimes I will, if I'm working from photo, I will lighten the photo so I could at least see the structural parts that are important. But when I get into painting them, I often let them just kind of fall away. So looking at silhouettes, a great useful kind of technique is looking at, for example, the silhouette of her earring, but making sure the ear is in the correct place, of course, is more important. Does it matter if the grid is accurately drawn? Yeah, I mean, I'm used to drawing a lot of straight lines, so I did eyeball mine, but I do recommend you be as accurate as possible. The most important thing, though, is that you have, so you can use like a T-square to make sure your lines are perfectly horizontal or parallel when you're drawing your grid, but the most important thing is to make sure you have the correct ratio. So if these were sized and the grid was sized to the ratio of 11 by 14, it doesn't mean you have to paint it in that same size, but you have to paint in the same ratio. So you can scale up, but you have to make sure that the height to the width is the same ratio. A little calculation will help you figure out what that ratio is, and then you just make sure if you're going to paint bigger that it's the same ratio. Okay, so just make sure that is the same as your photo, and you'll be fine. So I cropped all these photos to 11 by 14, and so the grid is not going to stretch or get kind of contorted so long as you're working in the same ratio. If you suddenly decide you're going to work on a 12 by, let's say, 24, that's very long and narrow, and obviously your grid is going to get distorted. And the software I used to create the grids on the photo, I just used Photoshop. It was very, very straightforward. So in Photoshop, I believe you hit the Shift key and it lets you draw a straight line. You could do it in Photoshop, or you could do what I just used to do, and I'd print out my reference and I'd either put it inside a protective sleeve, have it laminated, or I would just draw straight on the photo my grid with the ruler. That's the best way to kind of replicate your grid, just in case you don't have the file size right for your photo, if that makes sense. Okay, so I think, let me just double check, because I know I had a few questions under a couple of your guys' accounts. I think that was the major one. Sorry, I know this critique has kind of been a long one. Does anyone else have any questions right now while I'm looking for these other questions? I'm sure you guys will have questions when, okay, it might have been in group A. Sorry, I'm going to have to go through each of these and make sure. Some of you had questions about your imprimatura, so I just wanted to show this one real quick. This one is a little bit like uneven, but it actually can work just fine. So your imprimatura doesn't have to be 100% perfect. The main thing is if you go too dark with yours, you might have a hard time seeing your transfer lines. So I mentioned this earlier in this stream, but if your imprimatura is really, really dark, like about as dark as the umber will go, then you might have a hard time seeing your transfer lines. And you'll see in the video today there is a way I kind of solve that, because transfer lines do sink in and dry a little bit lighter, or they might dry a little bit lighter. But If you have a little bit of unevenness, that's okay. If you have a really dark imprimatura and you're worried about your lines showing up, make sure you mix a little bit of ultramarine blue, or any kind of blue would actually work, with your umber, just a little bit, to make it slightly darker than the ground. And that should make sure that you see it just fine. So Susan, you just asked, wondering about the tiny bit of the bottom of the left ear you see by the earring on the drawing you chose. So let me get back to your drawing real quick. Oh, you're talking about here on the left side? Like this little section there and the little bit here? Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah. You know, it's so small, you almost wouldn't miss it. I would indicate the top one because that makes more sense. But this one might just be too small to really worry about. So yeah, maybe indicate the top shape, but don't worry about the bottom shape so much. So I'm going to search through real quick. Does anybody watching remember that they had included questions? Ah, here's another imprimatura I just wanted to show. So see how this one is pretty dark? That's what mine looks like in real life. You'll see in the video how dark it really feels. The photo I had posted on our page looked a little bit lighter. It's hard to get the exposure right, so on my camera. So yeah, this is perfect. But if you are worried about your lines being visible when you transfer, because they might be a little harder to see if your imprimatura is a little darker, then again, try mixing a little blue, if you have it, oil paint, into your brown when you coat the back of your panel. And that will ensure that it goes down dark enough. And you should still be able to see it even if you don't. But like I said in the video, I show you how to bring your transfer back to life if it sinks in and looks a little hard for you to see. Okay, so yeah. All right, I think that's it. And if I forgot your questions, or if you guys have any other ones that pop up, just, you know how to reach me. All right, so this was a long critique because there's two groups, and normally I'm going to split these up into 2 stream options, but because group B was a little bit smaller this round, I just did it as one long live stream. But next time I will just take a quick 5-minute break around 12:30 before I start with group B. So if you're in group B, then just make sure you tune in around then. You're welcome to join for the whole time, but like I said, I know it's really long, and the critiques can kind of drag out. So thanks, Diane. I'm glad you enjoyed the critiques. Thanks for tuning in. All right, everyone. I will see you on Facebook, and I hope you enjoy the new lessons this week. Thank you, Kate. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.